Every night while you sleep, your pancreas is working, not resting, working, quietly measuring, quietly adjusting, trying to keep one number inside a narrow, forgiving range. And what decides how hard that organ has to work tonight isn't the dessert you didn't have. It's the food you did have, hours earlier, that never once tasted sweet. I want you to sit with that for a second, because it's the whole reason I'm making this video. Most people over 50 have made peace with sugar. You've cut the soda, you've skipped the cake, you feel, reasonably, like you're doing the responsible thing. And meanwhile, on the same plate, there are foods with no sugar in the ingredient list at all that are pushing your blood glucose higher, faster, than a spoonful of sugar itself would, not a little higher. In some cases, dramatically higher. And almost nobody has told you which ones, because they don't look like the enemy. They look like breakfast. They look like a diet snack. They look, in one case I'll get to, like the most comforting food on the entire planet. Stay with me all the way to the seventh one, because it's a food I grew up eating. A food that sits at the center of my own country's kitchen table. And if I'm going to be honest with you in this video, I have to be honest about that one too. It's the one almost nobody expects to see on a list like this. And by the time we get there, you'll understand exactly why it belongs. My name is Dr. CO. I've spent more than 15 years in internal medicine and nutritional biochemistry, which is really just the study of what food does to the body once it's past your lips, at the level of molecules in blood vessels and organs, not just calories on a label. I've watched thousands of patients get their blood work back and ask me the same confused question. But I don't even eat sugar. Why is my glucose still high? This video is my answer to that question. I'm not here to sell you a supplement, and I'm not here to frighten you into some 6-week program. I'm here to walk you through what the research actually shows, plainly, so you can look at your own plate differently tonight. Let me give you the 60 seconds of biology that makes everything after this land the way it should. Picture your bloodstream as a narrow river that has to stay within its banks. Glucose, blood sugar, is the water level. Too low, and your brain, which runs almost entirely on glucose, starts to struggle. You feel shaky, foggy, irritable. Too high, and it's a different kind of damage. Slower, quieter, and in many ways more dangerous because you don't feel it happening. Excess glucose in your blood begins to interact chemically with proteins throughout your body, forming compounds researchers call advanced glycation end products. Think of it as sugar molecules essentially gluing themselves onto proteins in your blood vessels, your kidneys, the lens of your eye, even your skin. That gluing process stiffens tissue that should stay flexible. Do it once, it's nothing. Do it several times a day, every day for years, and it's a slow erosion of the exact organs that keep you independent after 60. Your kidneys, your retinas, your blood vessels, your brain. Your pancreas is the organ standing between you and that damage. Every time glucose rises, it releases insulin, a hormone whose job is to usher that sugar out of the blood and into your cells for storage or energy. After 50, for a huge number of people, that system starts to lose some of its precision. Cells respond to insulin more sluggishly, a state researchers call insulin resistance, and the pancreas has to work harder and shout louder to get the same job done. Every sharp spike in blood sugar is one more shout. That's the stakes. Not you'll gain weight, your kidneys, your eyes, your blood vessels, your brain. Here's the one idea I want you to carry through every single item on this list, because it will make each one make sense the instant I say the name. Sugar, actual table sugar, sucrose, is a molecule made of two parts bonded together. One glucose, one fructose. Glucose goes straight into your bloodstream and raises that number quickly. Fructose does not. It travels first to your liver and gets processed differently, more slowly, in a way that barely moves your blood glucose reading at all. So when you eat a spoonful of sugar, only about half of it is the fast-acting kind. Now compare that to starch, the kind of carbohydrate in bread, rice, potatoes, cereal. Starch is nothing but long chains of glucose linked together, and your digestive system is extremely efficient at breaking those chains apart. Every single link in that chain becomes blood sugar, not half of it, all of it. That is the entire secret behind this list. Sugar is only half the villain it's made out to be, gram for gram, because of that fructose buffer. Starch has no buffer at all. Researchers measure this effect with something called the glycemic index, a scale pioneered back in 1981 by David Jenkins and colleagues that ranks how sharply a food raises blood glucose compared to pure glucose itself, which sits at 100. Table sugar, sucrose, typically scores around 65 on that scale. Keep that number in your head. 65, because every food on this list today scores higher than that. Some of them dramatically higher. And I want you to notice something else as we go. Not one of these 7 foods tastes like sugar. That's exactly the blind spot I need you to close today. Your body can't taste sugar. It only reads glucose in your blood. It doesn't care how the food arrived on your fork. Sweet, savory, plain, or seasoned. It only cares what that food becomes once it's broken down. That line is going to come back to you a few times today, because it's the whole thesis of this video. There's a second thread running under this one, and it comes from where I trained and where I still spend a lot of my reading time: Korean nutritional research and the old idea in Korean medicine called yaksik dongwon. Food and medicine share the same root. That tradition never treated a bowl of rice as something eaten alone. It was always eaten with a dozen small side dishes: vegetables, fermented things, protein, a little fat, specifically because that combination slows down how fast the starch turns into blood sugar. Fiber, protein, fat, even the acidity and something fermented all act like a brake pedal on digestion. That's the honest version of the lens, and I'll be blunt about where it does and doesn't help, because I'm not going to sit here and tell you fermentation makes carbohydrates disappear. It doesn't. What it can do, and what the last item on this list will show you very clearly, is change how fast that starch hits your bloodstream. And speed, as much as amount, is what determines the damage. Let's start the climb. Number 1. Cornflakes, and really most puffed and flaked breakfast cereals sitting in that same family. Here's why a food marketed for decades as the light, sensible start to your morning belongs at the top of a list about blood sugar spikes. Cornflakes score around 93 on the glycemic index. 93. That's not close to sugar's 65. That's nearly as high as drinking pure glucose. The manufacturing process is the culprit. The corn is cooked, rolled paper thin, then toasted, and that combination of heat, moisture, and mechanical processing breaks the starch down into a form your gut can digest almost instantly. There's very little fiber left standing in the way, and almost no protein or fat to slow the whole process down. So you get a rapid, steep rise in blood glucose within 20 to 30 minutes of that first bite. And then, just as predictably, a hard drop an hour or two later that leaves a lot of people reaching for a second snack by mid-morning. What should you actually do tonight? If cereal is part of your routine, look for genuinely intact grains. Old-fashioned rolled oats, not instant, or a bran cereal with at least 5 grams of fiber per serving, and add a source of protein alongside it. A few walnuts, some plain yogurt, an egg on the side. The combination, not the elimination, is what changes the curve. Number 2. White bread. And I want to be specific here, the French baguette in particular, because it actually tests worse than an ordinary sandwich loaf. You'd assume plain white bread is a minor player next to a can of soda. It isn't. Standard white bread runs around 75 on the glycemic index, and a French baguette, because of its very fine crumb structure and lack of fat in the dough, can push into the low 90s in published testing. Again, meaningfully higher than sucrose's 65. The mechanism is almost identical to the cereal. Refining wheat into white flour strips out the bran and germ, along with the fiber and fat they carried, leaving nearly pure, rapidly digestible starch. Toast it, and the browning reaction actually breaks some of those starch molecules down even further before it ever reaches your mouth, which is part of why toasted white bread can hit even faster than fresh. What's the swap? Genuine sourdough made with a long natural fermentation tests measurably lower on the glycemic index than standard white bread, because the organic acids produced during fermentation slow down how quickly your enzymes can access the starch. A dense, seeded whole grain loaf does the same job through fiber instead of acid. Either way, pair it with real fat, olive oil, avocado, a hard cheese, and you flatten that curve further. We're 2 items in, and if you're already thinking about your own pantry, good. That's exactly the reaction I want. Stick around, because the next 2 are the ones that trip up people who think they're doing everything right. Numbers 3 and 4 are the ones health-conscious people get wrong most often, and if you're the type who reads labels and still feels confused by your glucose numbers, this is going to explain a lot. Number 3. Instant oatmeal packets, specifically the flavored kind. Maple brown sugar, apple cinnamon, the ones marketed straight at people trying to eat clean. This one earns its spot through betrayal, honestly. Oats have a genuinely good reputation, and steel-cut or old-fashioned rolled oats deserve it. They typically score in the mid-50s on the glycemic index, below sugar. But instant oatmeal is a different food entirely. The oats are pre-cooked and then dried and rolled paper-thin so they'll soften in a minute of hot water, and that processing destroys the same structural barrier that made the original grain slow to digest. Add the flavored packets added sugar on top of that already fast starch, and published testing on instant oatmeal runs into the high 70s to near 80 on the glycemic index, well above sucrose and well above what the box implies about itself. What should you do? Buy the plain old-fashioned oats, the ones that take 5 minutes on the stove, not the 90-second packets, and flavor them yourself with real cinnamon, a small spoon of natural peanut butter, or fresh fruit. You get the actual oat you thought you were eating, and you control exactly how much sugar goes in, which for most people ends up being far less than the packet contained anyway. Number 4. And this is the one I mentioned as one people rarely question because a doctor often recommends it. Sports and rehydration drinks. The Gatorade-style electrolyte beverages many of us reach for during a stomach bug, in the heat, or because a doctor said stay hydrated after a procedure. Here's why this one belongs on a list you didn't expect it on. These drinks are engineered specifically to deliver glucose fast. That's the entire design goal, because they were built for athletes who need quick fuel mid-competition. Testing on standard sports drinks puts them around 89 on the glycemic index, comfortably above table sugar's 65. And unlike a piece of candy, we drink them in large volumes, over long stretches of an afternoon, often while sick or immobile, which is exactly when your body is least equipped to handle a glucose surge. I need to be careful and fair here, because there's a real protective use for these drinks. Genuine dehydration, especially in older adults, can be dangerous, and I am not telling you to skip fluids or ignore a doctor's instruction to rehydrate. What I am telling you is that for routine, everyday hydration, water, or an unflavored electrolyte tablet with little to no sugar does the job without the glucose spike. Save the sugared version for the specific situations it was actually designed for. Genuine illness with fluid loss under a doctor's guidance, not as your everyday water bottle. Number 5. Rice cakes. The thin, puffed, plain white ones sold for decades as the ultimate guilt-free diet snack. This is the one that genuinely stops people in their tracks in my office, because rice cake sounds like the safest word in the aisle. The truth is almost the opposite. Rice cakes are made by puffing rice under high heat and pressure until the grain nearly explodes into an airy, low-density structure. And that structure is precisely what makes it digest so fast. Published glycemic index values for plain puffed rice cakes run around 87, again well above sucrose. And because they're light and low in calories, people tend to eat 2, 3, 4 of them at a sitting, thinking they're being virtuous the whole time. A stack of rice cakes with nothing on top can move your blood glucose almost as hard as a candy bar, just without the guilt attached to the wrapper. The fix isn't to avoid rice cakes forever, it's to never eat one alone. A tablespoon of natural almond butter, a slice of real cheese, half an avocado on top, turns the same snack into something your body handles far more gently, because that fat and protein slow the whole absorption process down. We're at the halfway point, and I want to bring back the one idea I asked you to hold on to at the start. Your body can't taste sugar. It only reads glucose in your blood. Every single food so far has proven that not one of them tasted sweet, and every one of them outscored sugar itself. Number 6. The mashed or baked potato, and I mean the common russet variety most of us grew up on. A potato is a vegetable, and I understand the instinct to file it under healthy without a second thought. But a potato biochemically is almost pure starch. Very little fat, modest fiber, especially once the skin is removed, and a structure your body digests with remarkable speed. Depending on the variety and how it's cooked, baked, and mashed, russet potatoes have tested anywhere from the mid-80s up past 100 on the glycemic index in published research, some of the highest values recorded for any common food, well above sucrose, and in some studies, even above pure table sugar's effect gram for gram. Mashing makes it worse, not better, because you're mechanically breaking down the potato cell structure before it even reaches your stomach, handing your digestive enzymes a head start. Here's what actually changes the number. Cooking potatoes and then cooling them. A cold potato salad or a baked potato refrigerated overnight and reheated allows some of that starch to convert into a form called resistant starch, which your body digests much more slowly, closer to fiber than sugar. It's a real, measurable effect, not a trick. Keep the skin on for extra fiber, and always eat potato alongside protein or fat rather than as the centerpiece of the plate. And now, number 7. The one I told you at the start we'd get to, and the one I've thought about the most while preparing this video, because it comes from my own kitchen, my own childhood, my own country's table. White rice. I want to say this plainly, because it would be easy for me to soften it, and I promised you at the start that Korean doesn't mean safer in this video. White rice, the polished, refined grain eaten by more people on this planet than almost any other single food, tests high on the glycemic index across nearly every published study, commonly in the 70s to low 80s, and for some short grain and jasmine varieties, well into the 90s, occasionally testing higher than pure glucose in specific studies. That is the same mechanism we've seen all day. Milling rice strips away the bran and germ layer, along with the fiber that would otherwise slow digestion, leaving a grain that is, structurally, almost pure rapidly digestible starch, very similar in your bloodstream to eating flour straight. A large bowl of white rice, eaten alone, can raise blood glucose as sharply as anything on this list. Here's the honest part, and it's the reason I put this one last, instead of first. The old way of eating rice in Korea was never a large bowl of plain rice by itself. It was a modest bowl of rice surrounded by a dozen small dishes, vegetables, a little protein, and fermented sides like kimchi, which carries real fiber and organic acids from the fermentation process. Research on meal sequencing and mixed meals has repeatedly shown that fiber, protein, fat, and acidity, eaten alongside or even before a starchy food, blunt how sharply that starch raises blood glucose afterward, sometimes by a substantial margin. That's not folklore. It's measurable digestive physiology. But I have to be honest with you about the other side too. That same kimchi, and Korean fermented food more broadly, is often extremely high in sodium. And for anyone managing blood pressure or kidney disease, that's a real trade-off, not a footnote. A food can protect one system and strain another at the same time. So no, the answer here isn't eat rice with kimchi and you're covered. The answer is smaller portions of rice, always alongside protein, vegetables, and fiber, rather than as the main event on the plate. And if brown or short-grain brown rice works for your palate, it tests meaningfully lower on the glycemic index than white rice does because the bran layer stays intact. That's a genuinely useful swap for a genuinely beloved food, not an instruction to abandon it. That's the 7. And here's the line I want you to leave this list with. This isn't fear, it's food chemistry. Every food on that list has a real, published, defensible mechanism behind it. None of them are poison. All of them are simply faster than most people assume. And speed, for your blood sugar, is the whole ballgame. So how do you actually use this in real life, starting tonight, without turning every meal into a math problem? 3 habits do almost all of the work. First, never eat a starch alone. That single habit is the biggest lever on this entire list. A slice of bread with a hard-boiled egg, rice with vegetables and fish, a potato with a piece of chicken, protein and fat, slow gastric emptying, meaning food leaves your stomach more slowly, and glucose enters your blood more gradually, flattening the spike whether you're eating cornflakes or rice. Second, sequence matters more than most people realize. Eating vegetables and protein a few minutes before the starchy part of a meal has been shown in several studies to blunt the glucose rise that follows, likely because it slows stomach emptying and softens the insulin demand. It costs nothing and takes no extra time. Third, cook and cool where you can. Rice, potatoes, and pasta all form some of that resistant starch I mentioned when they're cooked, refrigerated, and reheated the next day. A genuinely simple habit, not a gimmick, that measurably lowers the glycemic impact of foods you're already eating. Let me tell you about a patient I'll call Grace, because her story is the one that comes to mind every time I write a script like this one. Grace was 68, recently told her fasting glucose and her A1C were both drifting into a range her doctor called pre-diabetic. She was, by her own account, doing everything right. She'd cut dessert entirely, she didn't touch soda, and she genuinely couldn't understand why her numbers kept creeping up. When we went through a few days of her actual meals together, the pattern became obvious. Breakfast was cornflakes with skim milk. Lunch was often a plain baked potato with a little butter, because it felt light. And most evenings, a couple of rice cakes with peanut butter as her evening snack, because she'd read they were a smart choice. Not one dessert in the entire week. And her glucose was still climbing, quietly, meal after meal. We didn't take a single thing off her plate. We just paired what was already there. Eggs alongside the cereal, chicken alongside the potato, real cheese on the rice cake instead of a thin scrape of peanut butter, and asked her to eat the vegetables on her plate a few minutes before the starch. 3 months later, her A1C had come down enough that her doctor moved her out of the pre-diabetic range entirely. What struck her most, she told me, was that it hadn't felt like restriction at all. It felt like something she was adding to her plate, not something she was giving up. I want to be honest with you about where this list has limits, because general guidance is never a substitute for your own numbers. If you're already managing type 2 diabetes, especially if you're on insulin or a medication that can cause low blood sugar, the glycemic index of a food matters, but so does the total amount of carbohydrate and the timing around your medication. That conversation belongs with your own physician or a registered dietitian, not a video. If you're on dialysis or managing advanced kidney disease, potassium and phosphorus in foods like potatoes and some grains can matter as much as or more than the glycemic index, and those limits are individual, not universal. And if you're on blood thinners, I'll flag this because people don't expect it. Some fermented foods, including certain preparations of kimchi and other vitamin K-rich vegetables, can interact with warfarin specifically, so consistency matters more than any single food being good or bad. None of this is a reason to be afraid of your plate. It's a reason to ask your doctor for an A1C test at your next visit if it's been a while. So you're working from your actual numbers instead of a general list like this one. And I'll say this clearly because I never want a video like this to be misread. Nothing here is a reason to skip a prescribed medication, skip a screening your doctor has recommended, or cut back on water, sunscreen, or anything else that's genuinely protecting you. This information is educational, based on published research, not personalized medical advice for your specific situation. Please talk with your own doctor or a registered dietitian before making any real change to your diet, especially if you're managing diabetes, kidney disease, or take medication that affects your blood sugar. Let's bring it all together, quickly. because I want this to actually stick with you past today. Cornflakes and puffed cereals. Pair them with real protein, or switch to old-fashioned oats, white bread and baguette. Choose a true sourdough or a dense whole grain, and add fat. Instant oatmeal packets. Go back to the plain, slow-cooked version and flavor it yourself. Sports drinks. Save them for genuine dehydration, not daily habit. Rice cakes. Never eat them bare. Mashed or baked potatoes. Cook, cool, and reheat when you can, and never eat them alone. And white rice. Smaller portions, real vegetables, and protein alongside it. Brown rice where your palate allows it. If you only change one thing tonight, make it this. Stop eating any starchy food by itself. That single habit, pairing, not eliminating, will do more for your blood sugar than cutting dessert ever did for Grace, and it will do the same for you. Your body can't taste sugar. It only reads glucose in your blood. I hope that line stays with you the next time you reach for something that doesn't taste sweet at all, because that's exactly the moment it matters most. Tell me in the comments, which of these 7 surprised you the most? I genuinely read every one, and I'll tell you, the potato and the rice cake are the 2 I get the most disbelief about. If one of these was news to you, someone you love is probably eating the exact same way without knowing it, and it takes 10 seconds to send them this video. And if you want real sourced information about eating well after 60 without the fear and without the sales pitch, subscribe, because next week I'm looking at 5 everyday drinks quietly raising blood pressure in people who've never had a salty meal in their life. I'll see you there.